Welcome to the Orlando Fire Department Museum. The museum is housed in the original Fire Station No. 3 building, also known as the Northside Station, built in 1926 and opened at the end of the same year. Fire Station 3 was decommissioned from service in the early 70s, and it was later moved here to Lock Haven Park to become a fire museum. The grand opening was 1985, during the centennial of the Orlando Fire Department. OFD, as it's commonly referred to, operates the Orlando Fire Museum with the volunteer help of fire department retirees, members, and family members. Before we start the tour and history lesson about the Fire Museum and the Fire Department of the past, I want to talk a little about this special museum tour at this most unusual hour. The question some might ask is why folks would expect to find spirits or ghosts in this particular 85-year-old building. But as I thought about what I would say about it, it came to me that if the spirits of these fine public servants needed a place to hang out, what better place than this magnet for early firefighters of Orlando who have passed on. Certainly the spirit of firefighting in Orlando is alive and well within these walls. Here's some food for thought. The history of this fire department spans over 128 years, to include the first voluntary organization of citizens to fight fire led by William Sherman in 1883. Hundreds of stories could be told of the saving of lives, the valiant efforts, the close calls when volunteers and later paid firefighters were willing to dedicate themselves to responding to other people's emergencies, even risking harm to themselves, risking their very lives. Some, as we will hear later in the tour, some on this very department had given the ultimate sacrifice responding to those emergencies, and while performing this all too often dangerous job. While we would ask that you be respectful of all the firefighters, we would ask that you have the highest respect to those members of this department who have died in the line of duty. And we must not forget the tragedies to which the fire department responds, that are also part of the history of a fire department, when no matter what you do, you cannot save a victim or victims of fire, accident, violence, or whatever the alarm. And who knows how often the very equipment in this museum have been in close proximity to many of those tragic scenes. Could any of those victims' spirits visit this museum? Who knows? Maybe you will find out. If you can get any of this apparatus to tell you in anything in any way, I for one would love to hear their stories. Early firefighters spent a lot of time in their firehouse. Some spent more time in the old engine house than in their own homes. The firehouse was the center of many volunteers' lives, wedged between their jobs and their homes, maintaining readiness of their equipment, honing their skills in using that equipment. And it was also their social center, hanging out with the boys, a brotherhood that goes back to the very beginnings of firefighting. I'm remembering the story of one man named Bennett who slept at the first engine house for many years. It was not much more than a barn. He would sleep there just to have the horses hooked up when the volunteers arrived, making them able to respond more quickly and efficiently to a fire. But he must have been able to spend at least some time at home with his wife, because his son, Maxie Bennett, would follow in his father's footsteps and decades later become Orlando Fire Chief. Another man, William Dean, whose name is on the opening day plaque on the front of this very building, did not sleep in his home for years so that he would be able to beat his men to the fire and be responsible for them. I can't quote the statistics, but I'll stand by the statement that William Dean dedicated more of his life to the Orlando Fire Department than any other citizen in its history. And it's a record that most likely would be impossible to break. Dean's son Gideon also started on the Junior Hose Cart Volunteer Company at the age of 13. When William Dean was forced due to failing health to resign, son Gideon would step in and take his father's position at the helm of OFD. Sadly, he would not long after become Orlando's first fire chief to die doing that job. He fell ill on a cross-country trip to Seattle, Washington for a fire chiefs conference. He died in Seattle of that illness upon arrival. Conference attendees held a fitting fire department ceremony at the train, which delivered his body back to a mourning Orlando Fire Department and so many citizens who knew him as he had grown into a fine chief officer. I could go on with a lot of stories, but you must be getting the idea. So that with that bit of history in mind, I guess we can agree that there's no location that would attract the spirits of these people more than this fire museum, most especially those who served in this firehouse. This is the history repository, the physical vault for so many stories told and untold, of victory in their battle for the good and of the loss, tragedy, and feelings of defeat they felt when they were summoned too late to save lives or property, or were up against a larger challenge than they could handle at the time. There's a piece here you cannot find in an active firehouse. It's a final resting place for items that go back over a century to the beginning of Orlando firefighting. Oh, and I don't want to forget the animals. It was reported in the Reporter-Star newspaper that twice in the history of the local department, horses have dropped dead while on a run to a fire. Also, one of the fire dogs was actually run over and killed by the fire engine on the way out of the Oak Street station as well. So if you get a whinny or a bark on your tapes, you know where it came from. So let's begin the tour of the facility and its memorabilia before we go forth with your hunting.
Is there anyone here that would like to communicate with us? I'm going to go ahead and turn on the spirit box. The way we know that you're here is by coming close to these devices, and when this light goes all the way up to different colors, we know that you're here. We have a beautiful building. Anyone in here? Can you light up my meter for me? The fire truck? It's in front of us. We would love to see you. In our world, you would come up as orbs, possibly apparitions.
I heard a no.
Did you have a SETI?
Yeah, it's, I ran it through multiple channels, but it answered no.
Well, I got no, unfortunately, I didn't get any readings.
Okay.
I felt no cold, particularly cold spots. This is our attempt at homemade thermal imaging. Or infrared night vision.
Okay, we're ending our session. We're upstairs in the dorm area where they sleep.